However, matters became more complicated when Mark found a diary belonging to Sarah, which was previously unknown. This diary was hidden in a hiding place under her bed, and its contents were shocking. In it, Sarah described her experiences and fears associated with Father John. She wrote that he often approached her with proposals that seemed strange, even threatening to her. In one of her last entries, she mentioned that she was going to tell someone about these proposals but did not specify what exactly was discussed. Allison and Mark began to realize that Sarah may have had a secret that she was keeping. That could be the reason for her death. But the diary also mentioned a third person who, according to Sarah, knew about her plans and tried to stop her. This further confused the situation, as it became unclear who exactly Sarah trusted and who could be her ally or enemy. Meanwhile, detectives' attention was drawn to the church's financial records, which showed that large sums of money had been flowing through the church's accounts in recent months, the origin of which was unclear. The money was transferred to the priest's personal account, but its further use was not documented. This discovery forced detectives to think about possible motives related not only to personal relationships, but also to financial interests. Allison also learned that Father John had previously been involved in controversial real estate transactions involving land owned by the church. This might explain the source of the money, but it did not answer the question of how it related to Sarah's murder. Each new piece of evidence only increased the number of questions. The case became more and more complicated, and Allison and Mark realized that they needed to find a connection between these disparate facts. They began to suspect that there was something much more behind all this than just personal motives or jealousy. Perhaps it was about a conspiracy in which several people were involved, each of whom had his own interest in the death of Sarah. Meanwhile, anxiety began to grow in the city. People no longer knew who to trust. Every new discovery, every new suspicion added fuel to the fire. The community that was once close-knit and friendly began to fragment into groups, each with their own theories and suspicions. Allison and Mark knew that time was against them. They needed to find answers as quickly as possible before the situation got completely out of control. But the deeper they delved into the investigation, the clearer it became that this case was much more complex and dangerous than they could have imagined. As the investigation entered a critical phase, Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway began to realize that there were darker, deeper secrets behind Sarah Thompson's death than they could have imagined. The evidence they collected indicated that this crime was not just an act of violence, but the result of many ulterior motives and intrigues intertwined in the lives of several people, who, until that moment, seemed infallible. The first key moment came when Allison came across an old folder of documents related to St. Peter's Church. Among the many papers that seemed insignificant at first glance, she found several letters dated more than 10 years ago, which were addressed to Father John. These letters were written by a woman who mentioned her mistake and the unacceptable sin they had committed together. Allison realized that these letters could be related to an event that happened before Father John moved to Riverton. Mark, who was conducting a parallel investigation, discovered another important piece of evidence, a birth record hidden in the hospital's archives, which confirmed that John's father had a son born out of wedlock. This fact was carefully hidden, but as soon as it surfaced, it became clear that this secret could be a serious motive for the murder. Perhaps Sarah found out about this, and this put her life in danger. All this forced Allison and Mark to once again reconsider their initial assumptions. They now began to suspect that the murder might be part of a wider conspiracy. It is possible that not only Father John but also other people associated with the church had motives for eliminating Sarah, who could reveal these secrets. Allison decided to talk to Amelia Ross, the church secretary, again. She was one of the few who could know about the secrets hidden in the church archives. During the interrogation, Amelia admitted that she had long suspected John's father, that he had connections that he carefully concealed. However, she was afraid to talk about it since her own position depended on the priest, and she did not want to lose her job and respect in the community. Amelia also mentioned that in recent months, Sarah had often asked questions about the church's finances and where the money was going. She seemed to know or suspect something, but did not share her thoughts. Amelia recalled how Sarah came to her for the last time a few days before her death, very worried, and said that she needed to discuss something with Father John, but did not specify what. Another important detail was that Amelia noticed on the day when Sarah was killed how an unfamiliar man was leaving the church. He was dressed in dark clothes and tried not to attract attention to himself. Amelia did not attach any importance to this at the time, but now this memory began to seem extremely important to her. Allison and Mark began to suspect that this man could be the third person Sarah mentioned in her diary. They decided to check CCTV footage from the church area to try to identify him. On one of the cameras, they were able to capture the silhouette of a man entering the church on the evening of the murder. Although his face was hidden, they noticed that he acted extremely cautiously, as if he knew that he might be noticed. Allison and Mark began to suspect that this man could be a hitman, or someone who was doing the bidding of John's father. It is quite possible that the priest, afraid of revealing his secrets, decided to remove Sarah from his path but did not want to do it with his own hands. This hypothesis explained many of the contradictions in the case, but so far, there was insufficient evidence. All this led to the detectives deciding to return to questioning John's father. They knew he was hiding something important, but they couldn't yet figure out how to get him to talk. They planned to use conflicting evidence and newly discovered evidence to put him in a corner and force him to reveal the truth. Meanwhile, a new wave of rumors and speculation began in the city. The residents of Riverton began to realize that the murder of Sarah Thompson was just the tip of the iceberg, and that their quiet town held many more secrets than they could have ever imagined. People no longer felt safe, and mistrust grew every day. Allison and Mark knew they had to act quickly. They had a feeling that someone else might be in danger, and that the killer or his accomplice might strike again if they felt their secrets were about to be revealed. The investigation was nearing its climax, and they were willing to do anything to stop the killer and protect those who might still be in danger. The investigation has reached a boiling point. Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway knew they had to make one last push to tie all the threads together and finally find evidence that could lead to the arrest of the killer. The atmosphere in the city became increasingly tense. Rumors and fears penetrated every corner of Riverton. People were afraid to talk, but at the same time everyone wanted to know what really happened on that fateful night. After long days and nights of evidence analysis and questioning, Allison and Mark returned to the key questions that still remained unanswered. What was Sarah's true attitude towards Father John? Who was the stranger seen outside the church on the night of the murder? And what exactly could Sarah know that made her a target? Allison, following her intuition, decided to review the surveillance footage again. She managed to find footage that showed a mysterious stranger meeting with Father John in the back of the church, hours before Sarah was killed. They talked about something for a long time, and although the recording was without sound, it was clear from their gestures that the conversation was tense. This moment was decisive for Allison and Mark. They now knew that the priest not only knew this man but may have been complicit in his actions. Mark, meanwhile, worked on John's father's financial statements and bank statements. His attention was drawn to a series of transactions involving large sums of money, which the priest transferred to an account registered in the name of a certain Stephen Fletcher. The name was not familiar to the detectives, but after some investigation, they learned that Fletcher was a private detective of dubious reputation, who often did dirty work for those who wanted to remain in the shadows. Allison realized that this Stephen Fletcher could be the same man who was in the church on the night of the murder. Everything pointed to the fact that Father John hired him to get rid of Sarah, who could reveal his secret affairs. Now the detectives had to find this Fletcher and get him to talk. They began checking the possible whereabouts of Fletcher, and soon their efforts were crowned with success. Fletcher was spotted at a small motel on the outskirts of a nearby town. Allison and Mark wasted no time in heading there. Their goal was not only to detain him, but also to force him to confess to his participation in the murder. When they arrived at the scene, Fletcher tried to escape but was unable to escape pursuit. He was caught, and under pressure from the evidence he began to speak. Fletcher admitted that Father John actually hired him to scare Sarah into silence. However, things spiraled out of control when Sarah, realizing her life was in danger, tried to escape, and Fletcher killed her in a panic. Fletcher also said that the priest was convinced that Sarah had found out about his illegitimate child and illegal financial dealings, and that she was going to tell the public about it. This could ruin his entire career and reputation, so he decided to take extreme measures. Allison and Mark knew they now had what they needed to arrest John's father. They immediately returned to Riverton to fulfill their duty. The arrest took place quietly. The priest did not offer resistance, but his face expressed something more than just fear. It was the realization that his carefully built world had collapsed. As news of his arrest spread throughout the city, Riverton was overcome with a sense of shock and disbelief. People who had believed in Father John's holiness for so long now had to accept the bitter truth. Many could not believe that the person to whom they trusted their souls was capable of such an atrocity. There was one more important part left: the trial. John's father's case was to be an event that would change the life of the city forever. Allison and Mark knew they had a lot of work ahead of them, but now they had a sense of closure. They had finally figured out the complex web of lies and betrayal that led to the murder of Sarah Thompson. The trial of Father John O'Connor was an event that split Riverton in two. Some residents could not believe his guilt until the very end, while others felt that justice had finally triumphed. But regardless of opinions, this process was an ordeal for everyone that changed the life of the town forever. The court hearings were tense. Prosecutors presented extensive evidence, including the testimony of Stephen Fletcher, who, despite his own involvement, became a key witness for the prosecution. He spoke in detail about Father John's plans, how he ordered Sarah's murder in an attempt to hide his past sins and avoid detection. Evidence of financial fraud and an illegitimate child only strengthened the accusation. Father John, from the very beginning of the trial, maintained a grim silence. Only once, when his lawyer tried to portray him as a victim of circumstance, did he stand up and say that he was ready to accept his fate. This confession was short and dry, without a trace of remorse or regret. Perhaps he understood that his life was already ruined, and further excuses would not help. After long weeks of hearings, the jury reached its verdict. Father John was found guilty of all charges. The sentence was harsh life imprisonment without parole. This verdict became a kind of point in history that shocked the entire city. Many residents, especially those who believed in the priest's innocence, were shocked, but the truth turned out to be stronger than their faith. Allison Harper and Mark Ridgway, who worked tirelessly to solve this case, could finally breathe out. But along with the sense of accomplishment came the realization of how deeply this investigation had taken a toll on them personally. Allison, who had always prided herself on being objective and professional, realized that sometimes the truth can be too much to bear. Mark, for his part, was deeply moved by how easily people's trust and faith could be destroyed. Riverton changed after the trial. St. Peter's Church, which had once been the center of the city, now stood empty and neglected. Many parishioners stopped attending, and those who remained felt betrayed and empty. The once close-knit community was divided between those who tried to forget what happened and those who could not let go of painful memories. Emily Carter, Sarah's best friend, was also deeply shocked by the incident. She could not forgive herself for not seeing the evil in the priest, even when everything pointed to his guilt. The loss of Sarah and the collapse of faith in the person she trusted became too heavy a burden for her. Emily left Riverton a few months after the trial, trying to start a new life away from the shadows of her past. Amelia Ross, the church secretary, remained in the city, but her life too would never be the same. Her involvement in the investigation and subsequent events made her an outcast among the remaining parishioners, who saw her as one of those who helped overthrow their spiritual leader. She, on the other hand, felt relieved knowing that the truth had finally come out, even though it had cost her a lot. John Miller, a local journalist who followed the trial from the beginning, wrote a series of articles about the trial, trying to make sense of all aspects of the case. His materials became popular not only in Riverton, but also beyond. In them, he raised questions about how easily people can turn a blind eye to the truth if it contradicts their beliefs. It was time for change. Riverton, a city that once prided itself on being calm and religious, now had to rethink its values. People began to think more about who they chose as their leaders and who they trusted. The recovery process was long and difficult, but gradually the city began to heal its wounds. For Allison and Mark, the case was a lesson they would never forget. They continued their work, but now considered each new case with even greater caution, knowing that behind each lie there could be much more hidden than it seems at first glance. The story of Sarah Thompson, Father John O'Connor, and the town of Riverton is over, but its consequences will be felt for a long time. Not only the tragedy remained in people's memory, but also an important lesson that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, and that the truth, no matter how bitter it may be, must always be found and recognized.